Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're looking way past the basics of microeconomics to uncover the hidden behavioral forces that ultimately dictate global market prices. We're talking about the mechanics behind every single tap of your credit card and how those tiny individual choices ripple out to literally shape the entire economy.
But before we get into the heavy technical details, let me ask you something. If your favorite local coffee shop literally doubled their prices tomorrow, are you still waiting in line? Probably not, right? But what if your rent doubled? Completely different story. You might easily ditch the coffee, but you can't exactly give up having a roof over your head. That exact difference in human behavior is what economists obsess over, and is exactly what we're going to unpack today.
All right, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover what elasticity is, the four main types, zero in on price elasticity of demand, look at the power of percentages, and then wrap up with how we calculate the whole shebang. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. What is elasticity? Translating textbook math into human sensitivity.
At its absolute core, elasticity is just economists' shorthand for responsiveness. It's measuring the intensity of a market's reaction. Think of it like a rubber band, right? Some markets stretch out dramatically when you pull them with a price change, while others are incredibly stiff and barely budge no matter how hard you pull.
Now, mathematically speaking, the elasticity coefficient is really just a strict measure of cause and effect. It tells us if our trigger, the independent variable, changes by exactly 1%, well, how massive a reaction do we get in our dependent variable?
And looking at this breakdown, you can see it is absolutely not just about grocery prices. We're talking about nature and finance too. Like, how does a maize crop respond to rainfall? Or how do investments react to interest rate hikes? Or even how the labor supply responds to changes in the wage rate. It is basically a universal framework for measuring sensitivity.
Moving on to Section 2, let's break down the four types of elasticity, or what we can call the ecosystem of market responsiveness.
This ecosystem essentially splits into four distinct branches. First up, you've got price elasticity of demand, how your buying shifts when a product's own price changes. Second, income elasticity, so how your habits change when your paycheck gets bigger or smaller. Third, we have cross elasticity, which is wild because it looks at how your demand for one thing reacts to the price of a completely different thing. And lastly, price elasticity of supply, which flips the script entirely to see how producers react to those exact same price changes.
All right, Section 3, price elasticity of demand. We are putting the spotlight squarely on the buyer's reaction.
This specific one measures exactly how responsive consumer demand is to a price change, assuming, and this is a pretty huge assumption, that all other factors stay perfectly constant. Ceteris paribus, as the textbook says. We're essentially freezing the rest of the world in place just to see how much demand shifts when only the price is tweaked.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Look at how flat that blue demand curve is. That flatness is absolutely crucial. It represents a relatively elastic market. See how just a tiny little drop in price on that vertical axis triggers this massive horizontal jump in the quantity people want to buy? It's a super sensitive market. A tiny price nudge creates a literal tidal wave in consumer demand.
Which brings us to Section 4, the power of percentages. We're figuring out how to compare apples to oranges.
So here's a massive real-world problem economists face. How do you compare the market's reaction to a change in the price of a pound of ground beef versus a luxury sports car? Well, you have to completely ditch absolute terms like rands, euros, or kilos. I mean, think about it. A €1 change on a car is basically a rounding error, but a €1 hike on a loaf of bread? That's a huge deal. So instead, we have to use relative terms, relying entirely on percentage changes and totally ignoring those physical units.
By converting the whole thing into percentages, the physical units just disappear. It's brilliant, really. This lets economists fairly compare market reactions across completely different industries, from petrol to ballpoint pens. And by giving suppliers this standardized absolute value, it tells them exactly when they need to ramp up or slow down their production lines based on market behavior.
Finally, Section 5, calculating elasticity methods. Let's look at the actual tools of the trade.
So how do they actually crunch these numbers? Economists basically rely on two formulas. First, there's point elasticity. It does exactly what it sounds like. It's used for measuring tiny, specific price tweaks at a single point on the demand curve. But then you've got arc, or midpoint elasticity. They pull this one out for the bigger, sweeping price fluctuations between two distinct points on the curve. Honestly, it's like the difference between using a microscope for the tiny details and grabbing a wide-angle lens for the bigger picture.
So here's the thought to leave you with. Next time you see prices creeping up at the grocery store, ask yourself, if a supplier knows exactly how sensitive you are to a price change, if they know exactly how far they can push the price before you'll actually walk away, are you really the one in control of the market? It definitely makes you wonder who's actually pulling the strings. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning those hidden forces around you.